Hey everybody, welcome back to Ditching the Spotlight podcast. If you're new here, we're an interview-style podcast series dedicated to the lives of celebrities outside of the spotlight. In today's episode, we have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Brendan Brown from Wheatus. This has been one of my favorite interviews so far, and it really comes out through our conversation. Check it out. All right, guys, in today's episode, we have the one and only Brendan B. Brown from the band Wheatus with us. You will definitely remember their hit song Teenage Dirtbag that was released in 2000 was ranked 69 on the Hits Top 100 Pop Songs of All Time. The song was featured in the movies Loser and Bully and was recently featured in Netflix The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. How are you today, Brendan?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Just finishing up my last cup of coffee for the day. Hopefully I don't get too shaky.
Yeah, I have to time my second cup as well, but I can't. It's funny. I can't really get my work done without it these days. I've been sort of caffeine addicted on a coffee level since I was about 2. So my grandmother was a sort of old Italian lady who believed in coffee, and she used to make us cups of heavily milked and heavily sugared coffee when we were little kids. And she did this weird thing, not to go off on a tangent already, but she did this weird thing with raw eggs. Like Italians had this, like, well, her family, I guess I should say, had this like old Sicilian thing where you'd put like a raw egg in the coffee at the bottom, kind of thing. And that's how you get your egg in your sweet coffee, So I thought until I was, maybe 10 years old, I thought coffee was supposed to have some slimy shit at the bottom of it. But yeah, that's how we did it.
I've heard of that before, putting the egg, and sometimes you can like froth the egg into the coffee to make it like really creamy.
Yeah, I haven't, I've never done that myself, except for what my grandmother made me. So sure. I wouldn't try it today. I'm not that into eggs.
No, I like eggs, but like the thought of like a creamy booger at the bottom of your coffee does not sound appetizing.
No.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to move on to the questions.
Sure.
So let's get right.
Now that we've grossed everybody out.
Yeah. Now that they got a bad taste in their mouth. So let's get right into the nitty gritty. Teenage Dirtbag was written in response to the backlash she received being a young man who loved bands like AC/DC and Iron Maiden, and amplified by a pretty bizarre incident that happened near your home. Can you speak to that and what role it played in writing the song?
Sure. So I would say that it was the environment of Long Island in 1984 was the setting for Teenage Dirtbag, the authentic period correct setting for that term and the vernacular of the time. And I know that since then, everybody has kind of had a chance to make it their own. And that's more important to me on some level, that it endures because of what people see of it in their own lives, not necessarily this satanic panic world that I grew up in. But the short story is that there was a lot of drugs and quite a bit of violence in the town I grew up in. And it was a satanic cult, quote unquote, but they didn't even know how to spell Satan. So it was like, it was really like just a bunch of dumbasses who thought they were tough and they were mean kids. And, I knew enough about them. By the time that the murder actually happened, I knew enough about them to stay away, and was aware of the fact that I was at 10 years old, that I was in sort of a dangerous world, and they murdered their friend, a kid they grew up with in the woods while they were tripping on all kinds of acid and angel dust. And it was over a robbery. It was somebody stole some angel dust from somebody else, kind of thing. So I think that the stupidity of it was overshadowed by the sensationalism, the way that it was covered in the press, and that led to the real problems never being addressed. It's like, what was going on in this town that these kids were able to get so much of these drugs, because they were, the police report says that they had smoked 15 bags of angel dust and done 10 hits of acid each.
Wow.
So we're talking about enormous amounts of very, very heavy drugs. So and they were like 17, 18-year-old kids. So like, where were they getting it, kind of, and they were also kind of runaways. And the story just gets weirder and darker the more you look into it. My friend Jesse Pollock wrote a book about it called The Acid King. But aside from that, the Teenage Dirtbag as a song has as its original setting the town I grew up in, Northport, Long Island, 1984. And that's sort of what it meant to be a dirtbag after that murder was quite a thing. I was 10. I was finding my identity as a musical person and beginning to understand my own style and what I liked. And AC/DC was way up there on the list of things that I was drawn to just for the sound. But the murderer was arrested with an AC/DC shirt on. And so this immediately sort of viscerally identified me as a dirtbag kid, or whatever the parents and teachers and other kids, even clergy, wanted to call it, And at 10 years old, I was already, having been raised a Catholic, I was already developing sort of atheist ideas. I couldn't really have described them to you accurately, but I had my doubts early on. I just didn't really buy into the magic of religion and any of that stuff. So I was kind of a skeptic to begin with. And the hypocrisy of this satanic panic was sort of ridiculous to me, that parents and teachers would think that there was Satan in music. Was just kind of like, huh? Like, I just like the guitar sound. What are you talking about? Like, it was so weird to have to contend with this other perception of the things that I liked, that I loved. I mean, I was playing guitar already, and really interested in this music that this kid who committed this horrendous crime had on his shirt. So it was like, at some point, I think my early sort of unformed mind was like, well, so be it, like, I mean, I can't help it if I'm a dirtbag. Yeah, well, you call me whatever you got to call me, tough, deal with it. And that was the sentiment of Teenage Dirtbag, and also a sort of like sort of nervous loneliness about the whole thing, resigned to not being able to, relate to somebody romantically and all of that kind of thing. Of course, my own personal life, I didn't go to a co-ed school with girls and boys. I went to a boys' school that was very far away from my home. And we weren't the kind of family that had the kind of money for like a boarding school. I commuted back and forth on the Long Island Railroad toward the city every day for about an hour and a half each way. So I spent 3 hours a day on a train when I was in high school, and there was lots and lots of homework. And the only thing I ever did besides homework and take the train and go to school was play my guitar. So social life was like, zip. And I wrote Teenage Dirtbag as the sort of like, well, if I had gone to public school and I still knew any girls or was dating or doing any of that kind of stuff, well, maybe that would have been this sort of pleasant fiction, where with a happy ending and so on. But my own personal life was not nowhere near that interesting. So I'll always believe that had that culture in my hometown of the drugs and sort of like violence and also the murder itself not happened, then I would have had a very different life. I might never have written the song, also probably might have, been more well adjusted with the opposite sex and like all the stuff that comes with it. But I did have somebody on the internet try to tell me that Dirtbag was an incel anthem, which I really got pissed off about, because I was like, hold on a minute. He's not blaming anyone or any group of people for this predicament. It doesn't feel like he's owed anything. This is not the perspective here, nowhere near it. In fact, I didn't even comprehend of that perspective until like now I'm in my 40s. I'm 47 years old, and that term and that culture and that idea, rotten and poisonous as it is recent. And I had a life like that, and I didn't think it was anybody's fault that I wasn't like expecting anything or felt like I had been cheated out of something I deserved. That was just like, well, tough shit, kid. Like you're in a weird situation. So, that was this is just the modern history of it now. I guess we're spanning the sort of sliding scale of what it has meant to people, but I feel in the end that it endures in a pleasant way, because people can see themselves in this happy ending, this sort of like unlikely moment, and it can be fleeting, and then they can get back to reality, sort of, which I like, because that was it. That was what it was, it's just a daydream, really.
Yeah. And I know that they had cut that kind of the ending out of the music video, where I think like a disco ball falls on Jason Biggs's head and he kind of wakes up, and that wasn't in the final uploaded video, but that kind of alludes to that, what you're talking about, the daydream, the kind of waking up from this the daydream. I don't know a better word for it, but yeah,
exactly that. It's always been a fantasy. And it was a fantasy in my own life. I didn't have anything like that happen. And I think that that's okay. One of the things that has become a thing lately is that no one's allowed to be a loser anymore. Everyone's got cred. Everyone's stacking up, clout. And it's kind of like, well, no, because losing and being a loser and coming to terms with not being successful is a really important part of life, that you have to learn how to lose. You have to learn how to feel that, the humility that comes with it, your sense of reality and your empathy for other humans and all of that. I am this whole like sort of Trumpian, like we never lose kind of, we're the winners kind of thing. I fucking never had time for that, it just wasn't my life. And I think it's not a lot of people don't have that experience at all, that they're like born losing, kind of like, yeah, the win is the exception. So I think that like in a culture where we're constantly like expected to, or sort of like focused on clout, incredibly valuable lesson about being a human, how to lose, is getting lost. And we see these goons storming the Capitol. I mean, they just never learned how to lose, man. Like they got to learn, someone's going to have to teach them the hard way, I think.
Absolutely. And I'm completely on your side with that. The whole never, I think what you're talking about comes down to privilege. They've always had, even on their low moments, it's not really a low moment for them. They still have the privilege of saying, I don't have to ride a train to work, or I'm sorry, to school for an hour and a half every day. And, the only free time I have is spent playing guitar and trying to do what I love.
Yeah. And, I mean, even that life, compared to what some people are going through right now, was quite privileged. The older I get, the more I'm able to sort of incorporate the idea that however successful you are, however happy you become, somebody else is suffering, like profoundly in some cases. And we can't afford to forget about those people and about that life experience and about the way that feels, because that's a dangerous thing to forget about. It's like toxicity of that can make horrible things happen. But when I was reading the news about the what's going on with GameStop and all this. And a lot of these people are kind of like providing anecdotes like, you think I'm going to miss the $100 that you steal from me on this deal while I'm trying to, take you down with a bunch of other people? No, I'll always be more concerned about the house that my father lost in 2009 when he had to declare bankruptcy and his business went out. And there's a, that winner culture is in a class of its own, currently controlling an enormous amount of how we feel about ourselves. And it's got to stop, has to stop. Time for reality,
I completely agree. In every way, I completely agree. Awesome. Well, that was some deep insight from you. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Yeah, sorry about the rabbit hole.
Oh, no. That's what this podcast is about, is getting into the minds of, people that have been in the spotlight and have had that experience and that. Yeah, I love it. Mm. So let's move on a little bit lighter. So the music video features Jason Biggs and Mina Savari. Mm-hmm. Were you ever able to meet either of them?
Yeah, met them both on the set. They were lovely people. Mina was newly married. I think she had been married very, very short time before that. So she was kind of still in her kind of honeymoon, I think. And she was really doing us a favor being there. I remember her new husband was on the set as well. But Jason turned out to be this sort of like kid from New Jersey who was just smoking cigarettes. And I hung out with enough of those guys growing up to know what he was like. And he was really funny, man. He was the kind of twisted humor that we enjoy in our band amongst each other, real dark stuff. I enjoyed getting to know him for a moment there. He was a nice guy. And we were really appreciative also that Amy Heckerling, who was the director of the film Losers, Fast Times at Ridgemont High and all these fantastic films that she was like this idol, and we were kind of like, what does she even want to do with us? Are you kidding me? Like, this is great. So I was pretty starstruck by the whole affair. And it was great. It was really cool. They were amazing.
That's really awesome. I feel like a lot of people know Jason Biggs from, now from Orange is the New Black, but before that, American Pie. But Loser is a fantastic movie. It's very funny. It's very like, in a way, kind of tragic almost. But
yeah. Yeah, it didn't get its day in the sun. It didn't get its love, but I enjoyed it. I saw it in a theater, and
I wish I did.
Yeah, and I remember thinking like, wow, we got a dirtbag plays during a helicopter fly-in shot of the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, the year before they fell, right? And then they cut, and they cut almost immediately to Dan Aykroyd is on the screen, and he was Elwood Blues to me, and so that was that as a music film, the Blues Brothers. It'll be impossible for me to not reference that for the rest of my life. Every moment of that movie has this like perfect musical, like the maestro is just like bing, and to have a piece of music playing on the real screen in a movie theater with Elwood Blues on the screen, to me was just like, okay, we're done. we can die now. Everything's fine.
That must have been like a very profound experience for you and the band.
Yeah, it was heavy. It was really heavy.
That's really awesome. Speaking of Dan Aykroyd, I've been wanting to try his Crystal Head vodka, and I haven't had the opportunity.
Is that the one that comes in a skull or something?
Yeah, that's
okay.
His.
I think my brother has one of those on his mantle that we keep talking about having, but I don't drink that much anymore. I used to have some whiskey here and there when I was in my 20s and 30s, but as I got older, it just kind of made me sick, like alcohol. Oof, it's just I cut through the good part and go straight to the headache, Yep. Yeah.
I find myself like if I'm having a couple of drinks like at dinner, by the time I go to bed, I'm already starting to feel like I have a hangover.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm on the same page with you on that.
So, longtime fans of the song and your band got a special re-recording last year uploaded to your YouTube channel. Tell us about getting back into the studio and performing that track again.
So the short story is, it seems that the masters for our first album are lost, gone. They were on a transitional format, and so I don't think they were ever backed up properly. But I submitted 4 sets of the tapes to our label, backups upon backups, redundancies, but they don't seem to have been migrated to Pro Tools or anything for that's future proof. So we decided to re-record the entire thing. And we did have this, I was able to salvage the second to last set of the masters, the original masters, which they're incomplete. They have the click tracks, and they have some of the drum takes are on there, and the guitars and bass, but none of the vocals are missing. And like, it was this set of tapes that we made before we finished, so it's incomplete. And from that, we rebuilt, replacing one instrument at a time to get it sort of properly placed onto the template of the original, so that it was as close as we could get. And we went crazy trying to get all the sounds right and all that stuff, and all the research of trying to get, what we did back then, remember and do it again and do it properly. And we finished Teenage Dirtbag last April, and its accompanying B-side single called Mope. During the process of deciding to re-record the first album, because we kind of knew we had to do it, or at least try, for years. We knew this was coming. We started in 2017 to start the process, because it's just such a headache. It's such an effort. It's like when you make a new album, you're constantly discovering something new, and that energy feeds back into a loop where you just yes, 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 and you just crack through into something new and beautiful. However, if you're trying to recreate something you already did that with, there's a staleness to the process where it's sort of tedious and forensic, and you're trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again instead of making him for the first time, fresh. So 20 songs will be on the finished product. That's 10 more than the original, because over the years, we accumulated a bunch of tunes that I wrote and that we put together that sounded so much like album 1 that we didn't use them, because it felt like we were kind of repeating ourselves. So we put them on the shelf, and here we are with this like sort of batch of 12 extra songs in addition to the first 10 that we did. We're going to make a vinyl that has 20, because you can't fit 22 on a vinyl. It's kind of weird, but the digital version inevitably will have 2 extra songs. So it's going to be 20 songs. It was meant to be in the year 2020, but we know what happened there. And so it's going to be probably 2021. We're going to have the bulk of it finished and released by the end of 2021, and we'll have it out. So that'll be our 20th anniversary edition of the first album. That's what we've been working on. And the first, like I said, the first version that we finished for that was Dirtbag, and Teenage Dirtbag 2020 is now on Spotify and Apple Music and all the other streaming services. But we did test it. You're right. We tested it on YouTube first, because we kind of had a feeling that because we got close enough, we were going to have some copyright strike notices that we needed to address. And didn't take long. We got a takedown notice on the master from Sony. So we had to go back and forth with our attorney and prove to them that it was a new master, that it wasn't the original. They fully and completely mistook it for the original, which we're proud of. And we were able to prove our point, and now we own our own master 20 years after the fact that we recreated from scratch. So that's sort of a happy ending.
Absolutely. It's kind of frustrating how like copyright and all that works, especially like the bureaucracy of owning your own music. I feel like is kind of ridiculous that Sony, owns at least they did own a majority of the rights to that song. It's very strange.
Right. Well, that's what the old school record deal was. You partnered with a multinational media corporation with the knowledge that they were going to own the copyright on the original master for 75 years, and that you would be licensing it to them for that period in order to for them to promote and distribute it using their big, multinational mechanism.
Yeah.
Of course, that's all been replaced by the internet and publicists and things like that. Direct distribution through TuneCore and CD Baby and whoever else. But yeah, we got really lucky because we kind of had one foot on the old record school world and one foot in the new. Our record was finished in early 2000, in March of the year 2000, and it came out that year. That was kind of the last year that the big 6-album major label deal ever took place. And of course, in the next few years, the music industry unraveled entirely, and iTunes came on. And keep in mind, when our first single came out, there was no YouTube, right? There was no MySpace,
no smartphones.
There was no smartphones. There was no Apple Music. There was no iTunes. There were no iPods yet. Nothing was there yet. And all of that happened in the next 3 or 4 years after our record came out. So we were in this weird sort of no man's land where we were on a major label. We had a 6-album deal, but the mechanism that they had built over the course of the entire 20th century for delivering records in retail positions crumbled and fell apart. So we got very lucky in the fact that they did not like our second album and didn't want to put it out. And we were able to walk with the masters for our second album. So ever since then, everything we've done has been completely independent and self-owned. And, I have a publishing administration deal with EMI. They oversee my intellectual copyright, but our masters are ours and ours alone at this point. So very lucky, because I know a lot of other acts from our time didn't have a chance to sort of walk between the raindrops on that. We got lucky. It was mostly accidents and sort of like a little bit of gut instinct, but we didn't really know. Nobody knew what was going on. In 2004, nobody knew that there was going to be direct digital distribution for artists. Nobody. I mean, it was an idea. It was being kicked around, but like it had yet to take shape. So we got lucky.
Well, it's refreshing to hear you say that, because it feels like a lot of bands will hold on to the spotlight and grasp it with, white knuckles to try to hold on, and they'll change their sound and they'll change the way they look and they'll change everything about themselves just to stay in the spotlight. And so it's refreshing to hear a band that, feels like they got lucky by getting out of it.
Yeah. I think that the spotlight thing, we never got used to it at all, because when Teenage Dirtbag came out in America, we had a little bit of radio success and a little bit of, it was on MTV. I think it was on a TRL Wannabe or something like that. But very quickly that all died off, and we wound up touring the States for the entire autumn after the release. Three months of touring in the States. Some shows were great, touring with Eve Six and Zebrahead and Harvey Danger, and most of them were really bad. I mean, like, I remember 2 people in Lawrence, Kansas, one of them giving us the finger, like that kind of thing. Like, we never got used to the spotlight. Even when we were on a major label and the record was out, we never got used to that. And then when it blew up overseas. It blew up in Australia that December, went quadruple platinum in Australia. And then the same thing happened in most of Europe and the UK and South Africa and some other places. And we wound up touring the world, but we always came home to New York in America, where nobody knew who we were and there was nothing going on. So we got used to that instead of the spotlight. We got used to some people knowing who we are, but almost like it being on another planet in another reality that we couldn't live. So we became, comfortable with not being known and just being able to somehow continue despite that through the 2000s. And then touring started to really pick up again around 2010. to the point that in 2016 we were doing a sold out arena tour with Busted in the UK.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was like, I know I mean, in between those 2 points, there were lots of lonely, rain-soaked, freezing cold load-ins and trailers and you know, dead end roads and getting lost and snowed in the mountains. And like, I mean, like, I couldn't even stand here and recall to you all the shit that we went through to just get on stage. It was, and if you were not addicted to music, and if it didn't mean everything to you, none of it would have been worth it. You would have said, no way, as most people would rationally say, I'm not doing this to myself. But at this point, it's kind of turned into this thing where Dirtbag does the work that it does, and we are able to have conversations like this with people who give a shit, and it's the best life ever, really. I mean, you know, I'll take it.
Awesome. I love to hear that. So moving on a little bit, back in April of 2020, you released the Quarantine Age Dirtbag video with over 100 fans singing the song. Can you tell us about what it was like to receive so many contributions from fans that love your song so much?
Right. So the two longest serving members of the band, Joey Slater and Matthew Milligan, our bass player, Joey's our backing vocalist, and she's also a songwriter in the band, and Matthew is our bass player, and he's also sort of our web guru. They came up with the idea 100% themselves, and Joey actually edited the video, which was a real challenge from everything that I understand. And we got so many cool submissions. The flute player really tied the room together, and he, like, the flute part on Quarantine Age Dirtbag is definitely my favorite. But then, of course, Josh Devine from One Direction got involved, and he did the sort of the final, like, really, like, finale drums only the way that he can, you know. From somebody who's had the highest level of pop stardom to people who have never been noted for their musical talent at all, we all put them in the same place doing the same thing during this weird time, you know, this quarantine. And I couldn't have been happier with the way that turned out. It blew me away. I was like, holy shit. Joey and Matthew, it was 100% their baby. So, and the people, of course, who submitted, who did all the hard work of playing and performing.
Absolutely. Me and my wife watched it probably 8 times. We loved it so much. It was just it reminded me of the have you ever seen the videos on YouTube called Playing for Change?
Yes.
Yeah. That's what it kind of reminded me of, but like a little bit more like with the people coming in and out and the different sounds. It was really well done and really inspiring to hear so many people like just in love with your song.
Yeah. And also there's so much talent out there, you know, like just the sheer, like, ability of people who contributed was shocking. Really good musicians. Every one of them I would be in a band with, you know.
Yeah, that's really, I hope they hear that you say that, because that would probably mean a lot to them.
Yeah, well, whatever it means, it's true. They killed it.
So you mentioned like having relatively low fame or like clout here in America, but in Australia and the UK and South Africa, it was like you guys were like household names. When the song was released and when it blew up in those countries, did you ever have like a strange fan encounter?
Not really. I mean, the people who show up to come see us play always wind up being these lovely people we have conversations with. You know, we're very accessible. We always have been. I'm not a big fan of the barrier between the audience and the act. And for that reason, we let the people attending the show pick our set list. We just rehearse as many songs as we can, and they shout it out, and we play them as they come in, you know. Wow. The shouts. So, we haven't done a set list since, like, I don't know, it's like 2007 or something like that. We just don't do it. And it's made a big difference because like, first of all, when you show up, the audience is a group of people who, you know, they spent their hard-earned money to come and see you play, right? they're standing for hours waiting for it to happen. Sometimes the sound is better in some places in the venue than it is in others, so they might not have the best seats in the house, and their effort to get there and be a part of the experience is something that I think a lot of artists struggle to honor, because they want to show up with their set list and their light show, and they want to show these kids what's going on and tell them. And I have always been way more of a fan of, why doesn't the audience tell us what they want? They're the ones who paid. They're the ones, this is their show. I'm here. They're my boss, tonight. And, make it worth their while, not yours, and see what they have to say about it. So we gave them the say on the set list, and it's made a huge difference in the ways we learn. First of all, when they start shouting out songs, we know what kind of a mood they're in. We know maybe what type of people they are, or what they've gone through this year. You're just learning. You're learning instantaneously, because you're learning what they want. What kind of a night they want to have, what kind of a night they need to have. So it's your obligation as an entertainer to process that information and deliver. And no set list is one of the ways that we do that.
That's probably one of the coolest things I've ever heard. I really, musically wise, I really wish that more bands would feel out what the crowd wants. And I couldn't remember the name of the band, but I remember that we went to a Warped Tour show once, me and a big group of my friends, and people were yelling out the songs they wanted to hear. And then at one point the guy stops and he's like, we're not playing that song. We're not playing that song. Like, get over it. And like, yeah. And a bunch of people left. They just like, fine, bye. And they just like walked away. That band's since faded into obscurity, I'm sure, because I can't even remember what their names were. But yeah.
I mean, it's not that important. Yeah, it's not as important to show them what you're thinking as it is to learn what they're thinking. You're going to have a better show if you know what they're thinking.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I always found set lists and big sort of like purposeful presentations is a little bit sort of arrogant, pushy. It's a little pushy,
Yeah. And, and sometimes these like big elaborate shows can be cool. Like they can have these big stage performance, like you said, and lights and props and stuff. But at the same time, if it doesn't feel personal to the person that paid their money to be there, I mean, they're not going to have a very good time, and they might not come see the band again.
Right. Trent Reznor is good at walking that line, I think.
Oh, what a fantastic musician.
Yeah, he has a real vision for what he wants to present on stage, but he never leaves them without the emotional connection that they need. And that's one case where, like, I mean, with Wheatus, our presentation is not about the lights or about, like, the narrative of the arc of the show and the effects and all that stuff. It's about the songs people want to hear and our ability to deliver them right, the right way. But I think with Trent Reznor or other acts like that, you have a much more sort of complete vision that seeks to incorporate what the audience needs into, everything that they do from the start. So it's a different point of view on it, but I don't think that he's, I don't think it's impossible. I think there are some artists that do it. There's very few.
Yeah, I agree with that. So going further on the fans, so I have to admit that I was a bit of an outcast in high school, and your song really helped me to feel not alone. That seems to be a recurring theme with fans. Do you have a message now for the kids discovering the song and if it helped them through like rough times in their life?
Whether you discover Teenage Dirtbag and it helps you out or not, you can find your own purpose in your alone time. I spent so many hours, so many days, so many weeks by myself. There were every single New Year's Eve, every single Halloween of all of my high school years. There was no party. There was no hanging out with anybody. That was just staring out the window kind of thing, And however you wind up in that situation, whatever the circumstances that get you there, it's important and difficult to remember that this could be an opportunity to get to know yourself, to analyze and learn about the way human beings are when they're in groups. Because when you're in one, and you're a part of a group, and you're used to it, it's become commonplace, and you go and join your group every day at school or whatever, there's lots of stuff you can miss about what that group is doing wrong, what that group is doing that's hostile or cruel, because you're in it, you can't see it. And getting outside of it is a lonely, lonely, horrible experience that some people don't even survive, if we're being honest about it. But it can also be, if you can find the strength to seek your own purpose, then you can begin seeking that purpose by sort of analyzing human groups for what they are from the outside, for what they actually are, not for what they are to you as a part of them, but what they actually are to somebody on the outside. And in your life, I think eventually, although there's going to be a lot of deficits to overcome because of that experience, you will eventually, if you focus, be able to make better decisions about the people who you do let in, about the things you do spend your time on, about the groups that you are comfortable with. Now, for example, right, we pretty clearly have a very, very dangerous white supremacist Nazi problem in the United States. They're literally storming the Capitol trying to kill Nancy Pelosi, right? And Mike Pence. And lots of people are out there talking about, well, we need to make friends with them and we need to figure out where we have common ground. Nope. I know enough about that group that I have to just forever and ever and ever, even if they fucking kill me, I have to say no, because look at when you look back at the history of Germany, right? You look back at what went on there and how it all fell apart and went bad. There's always that question in high school history class or my university class where people were like, well, how was it allowed to get to this point? What happened? People didn't say anything because they were part of the group that was doing it, right? So here we are. This is our chance to not be a part of that group no matter what happens, and just be the person who, when it's all over, no matter how it goes, if America falls apart or whatever, there's a record of me saying that we will not coexist with Nazis on the internet as far back as it goes. So that's the kind of perspective that it's almost an absolutist perspective where you're like, I am not in any shape or form going to concede that we should coexist with Nazis. It's not going to happen. That's not what they want. And we can't want it either, because we'll just wind up as prey, So that's one sort of extreme contemporary example of my perspective on groups because of the way that I grew up and all that. I'm like, I don't need to be friends with somebody bad enough that I have to join them at the fucking Nazi compound in Idaho and talk about how to take the government down. No, I don't need a group that bad. And if you learn that you don't need a group that bad, maybe you'll avoid that slippery slope for people who wind up in that circumstance,
Absolutely. I think that's a really important message for people growing up, that might not have a core friends group. They might join or associate with a group that might have, outrageous ideals like white supremacy or other things like that. And, if they're hearing this, just know that sometimes, it's better to wait and bide your time and find a group of like-minded individuals than it is to sacrifice your core beliefs and join a group that would be detrimental or even dangerous.
Yeah. And also on the other tip, it's okay to admit that you're susceptible, right? We all try and be perfect and I never had a bad idea about another person. I never had a racist thought and all that stuff. No. Everybody goes through some shitty version of themselves when they're growing up. Everybody sees a bad side of humanity and responds to it. But it's okay to admit that you, at some point, may have been susceptible or have had susceptible thoughts. And that's how you make sure you don't do it. Because you're like, no, I see this problem. I'm cutting it off. I don't want to be a part of this bullshit where other races are less human or whatever the fuck, nonsense. And, we are not doing a good enough job identifying susceptible people who are on the fringes and lost and lonely or whatever else. Loneliness is not an excuse ever to do some stupid shit like that. So, trust me, I know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Um, yeah. So you've been very like vocal and everything about what you believe in, and I mean, but so back in 2019, you made an appearance at a rally in support of Scottish and Welsh independence from the UK. Could you recount that experience and what it means to you?
Well, so I have to correct the record here. We happened to be there. Our bus was parked in Scotland, in Glasgow, in an alley that where right past the alley, the street that the alley was down, was where the protest was happening, where the rally was. And all day I had been monitoring it because for several reasons. First of all, because there was traffic in the city, and second of all, because we had to figure out a way to get in there without disrupting it or crossing the path. And also because the whole Brexit thing was happening, and I was incredibly interested in that and trying to figure out what was going on there and paying attention to Scottish and Welsh independence movements because of it, to see if it would, you know, come forth. And all the news that I was saying was like, there's two different accounts. One account where there was 100,000 people showed up, and one account where it was 5,000, and the conservative press was all about like, oh, there's nobody there, nobody showed up, and the real press was like, yeah, this looks like there might be 100 or 150,000 people out here. So I just went out and stood on the side and started counting. And by my calculation, there was probably about 75 to 100,000 people who were walking in this demonstration. So it was nice to be able to get firsthand knowledge of like what was being reported in the press. It revealed the bias from various news outlets. And I posted that on Twitter as just sort of a like, well, I've seen a lot of reports, but it looks like this is this many just because I'm watching it right now. And I wasn't asked to make an appearance, and I didn't actually try to. I just was posting information about what was up there. And the Scottish independence movement is a hell of a thing. I mean, if you know, if they feel the need to do that, then they need to do that. You know, Scotland is a country. They have their own people to look after, and if inclusion in the United Kingdom is and exclusion from the European Union is going to damage them, then they have a decision to make, and that's that. You know, they call it sovereignty for a reason.
Awesome. Awesome. I didn't know that. When I read about that, it seemed like you were, I knew you guys were touring in the area, but it seemed like you made a point to go out there, but it was kind of a happenstance, but it sounds like maybe you were happy that you were able to be there and report on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It all worked out really nicely. You know, like I said, it started as something we were paying attention to because of the practical need to navigate in and out of the city that day in a tour bus. But once we got settled, we realized it was this national news story, and we were able to sort of like look at it that way. So yeah, it was great.
Awesome. Awesome. So, moving on just a little bit, can you tell us about a truly memorable moment that you had while you were on tour?
We played a show in Northern Ireland at a youth center in Newry. It was a youth center for kids from disadvantaged homes and orphans and so on. And that show was just this level of magic that I don't think you could have at a normal club show. It was in the late afternoon, the sun was still up, and these kids just showed up at this youth center, and they just brought the house down. I mean, we couldn't have played anywhere near their level of excitement. We could never have played. They just lifted the whole place up, and that show sticks in my head. The show in Newry at the youth center in Northern Ireland. Yeah.
It sounds like an incredibly cathartic experience for you and the band. I mean, I wish I had been there to witness it.
Yeah, it was great. We have other notable, you know, we opened up for James Brown one time in Belgium.
Wow.
We played for Prince Charles at his, you know, trust in the park, and we were sandwiched between Meatloaf and Beyonce, you know.
Wow.
But we've met and crossed paths with people who we shouldn't be meeting and crossing paths with as a bunch of douchebags from Long Island. But the one that really sticks in my head is that Newry show. That's always going to be the top.
It's awesome. And I'm sure that, being there probably made a huge difference in those kids' lives, being from troubled pasts and misplaced homes and whatnot.
So I'll tell you a story. So several years later, we're on stage at an arena in Belfast. And I'm looking out over the crowd and I see this one kid, this ginger kid called Connor, who I met that day at the Newry Youth Center. He was just a kid. And his friends had all picked him up, and he's way out in the sea of this, 20,000 people in this arena. He's way out at the back of the floor, and I can see his red head. And I could see him the whole show. His friends lifted him up, and I just felt this. Never felt that in an arena before, where I was connecting with just this one kid the whole night. Connor out there from Newry. It just brought it home. And we got to see him again that night and say hello. And it was just magic,
That's
magic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's really important and amazing that you can connect with, one individual at a show as well as entertain an entire 20,000 arena.
Sure. Well, I don't know what it means to them necessarily, but I already knew what it meant to him. Like I already connected with him on it already. So.
Absolutely. It sounds like a really amazing experience.
It was, yeah very life affirming.
Absolutely. I'm so cool. So cool. So, you recently stated that Mike Doty was a huge inspiration for you as a young songwriter. Could you speak to any of your other influences?
Sure. Mike was huge. The whole Soul Coughing catalog, the 3 years that I was making the first Wheatus record, 97, 98, 99. The Soul Coughing stuff was really the cutting edge of like, what even is this music? It's like beat poetry, but it's also like the Velvet Underground, and it's got this trip hop jazz kind of hip hop vibe to it. And it was that music was everything at that moment, and it was from New York too. That was the other thing that was like really cool about it. But going all the way back, AC/DC, Rush, Prince, Willie Nelson, Tom Petty, Public Enemy, LL Cool J, Tribe Called Quest, Ani DeFranco, Fugazi, anybody who kind of really cut their own like tasty nugget out of music culture and presented it without compromise, I was on board, from like an abject maestro like Prince to, arguably the anti-hero vibes of Fugazi and music like that. I have a wide range of influences. I couldn't even could sit here all day and talk about them. You'd have to have another podcast,
Yeah.
Bands you never heard of, like Walt Mink. There's a band called Walt Mink that really influenced me heavily when I was a kid. Shudder to Think is another band. Helmet, Quicksand, band called Handsome, Jets to Brazil, Fishbone, King's X. Like, there's so much music that I just flip around on my Spotify. A couple of Beck records that I'm really into.
Oh, I know Beck.
Morning Phase and the other one, I forget what it's called, the one that came before that, Sea Change. There's records in this house, like, everywhere. So it's all over the place.
Awesome. So, speaking of, like you mentioned, AC/DC and Iron Maiden, have you had the opportunity to meet any of the members from either of those bands?
Yeah, we had the same management as Iron Maiden in the 2000s. A guy named Wheatus, who was really cool. And he hooked me up with Bruce, who came and sang vocals at Abbey Road on one of our singles, the Wannabe Gangster cut that we did at Abbey Road has Bruce's vocal on it.
Cool. Which
was this surreal moment. We needed a studio last minute. The only room that was open in all of London was the Beatles room at Abbey Road, room 2. We wound up working there for a week. me producing a track that I wrote with Bruce Dickinson singing on it. So it was like all the boxes got
Wow.
checked, AC/DC is a bit of a different story. I was arguably a lot more influenced by Angus Young than anybody else in my youth. And for a moment, AC/DC were on the same label that we were on. They were on Sony in 2002, and I got tickets to a show that they played at a club called Roseland. It's about a 2,000 or 2,500 capacity club in New York City. And I had backstage passes for the meet and greet on that too. And I was up there. I should say first, AC/DC was so serious to me that I was Angus for Halloween 2 years in a row when I was like 11 years old, 12 years, you know what I mean? So like, it's another level of fandom from my youth that it's almost superhero status kind of thing. And I was backstage at that show, at the club show at Roseland after their set, which was like, blinding, like unbelievable, incredible show. And we were all kind of hanging out, mingling, and the door at the back of the room swung open, and Cliff Williams came out, and he's the bass player, and I got a little nervous, but when the door swung back and opened again, I could see that Angus and Malcolm were in the hallway, and I chickened out. I was like, I can't do this. I don't want to see them. I don't want to meet them. I want them to stay who they are to me, so I left without meeting them. And it wasn't that I was nervous that they would let me down. It was that I didn't want them to stop being superheroes yet. It was 2002. Our first record had just come out and done its thing. We weren't in a particularly good spot at all. So I just wanted to be a fan. I still wanted to be just a fan and just a guy who knew how to play every part of every song back in the day when I was 13, like just that. I just wanted to stay that guy. And so I did. But I think these days, if I was to get the opportunity, I would meet them. I would say hello to Angus. I would thank him for teaching me how to play.
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective. I also grew up with AC/DC. My dad, huge AC/DC fan, Rush, all the bands that you named. I mean, he doesn't like Public Enemy or like A Tribe Called Quest, stuff like that. But I mean, Jim Croce, all those like AC/DC, Black Sabbath, all those bands I grew up listening to. And I think I'm with you that it would be a strange and a nervous and nerve-wracking experience to meet some of the people that I idolized for years. And I don't know if I could let them be people anymore and stop being superheroes, just like you said,
Yeah.
Not that they're not people.
No, I understand. I get what you're getting at. I think that that the fandom can be such an inspiration and so powerful that you want to hold on to it, and keep it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, as far as the hip hop influence, I grew up in New York, and so mixtapes here had the Ramones, and they had De La Soul. So there was a good mix of different music happening that on stuff that got passed around, at least in my high school, and a couple of tapes came my way from other boys, and it was eclectic. It was an eclectic mix of stuff. So I never really drew a distinction between, hip hop and rock, or folk and jazz or R&B. I don't have those distinctions really. I never did. First band I ever really loved was Sha Na Na, which is kind of like, what are they? They're like a doo-wop, throwback tribute. Awesome. Yeah. I mean,
very unique.
Yeah. So I didn't really see cultural divides in music.
Sure. I would love to have gotten like an original Ramones mixtape. I'm a huge fan of the Ramones. They're probably my top 3.
Yeah, I had I had a mixtape that had a Metallica's cover of Bread Fan on it, Beat on the Brat, and Going
Great
Back
song.
to Cali. Those three songs. It had other songs on it, but those were the three that I fast forwarded to the most.
That's a mix.
two from Queens, and yeah, it was is an interesting time. Two from Queens and one from San Francisco on that list. So yeah.
Absolutely. So speaking of like Queens in that area, so Wheatus was formed in New York's Lower East Side. Could you shout out any like awesome food joints in that area?
They're all gone now.
Oh,
yeah, Katz's
darn.
Deli is still there. Well, it's a bit more expensive than it was when we hung out playing the Luna Lounge around the corner and getting hot dogs afterwards.
Sure.
But yeah, New York, food wise, if you're in New York City and you want, like, there's a Mexican place called Vamos al Tequila, which is in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where I used to live. That's some serious grandma Mexican food. That is like it. You got to hit that. Pizza. There's a place up on 186th Street that I love. My friend Manny actually runs the pizza place up there. That's called Universal. But yeah, I mean, I there's street food in New York. You can't really fuck up. You just go find something. Just go on an adventure. People ask about, like, where should I go in New York? What should I do? I say, like, you know what? Let it tell you. Like, just wander around. The best New Year's Eve parties I ever had in my life were, I was just, I was single. I just walked out of my apartment on New Year's Eve and went down the street and wound up somewhere. And it was like the adventure of a lifetime. I didn't have plans. I didn't text anybody. I didn't tell anybody where I was going. I just went. New York City will take care of you. You have to trust it.
That's awesome. I love that advice.
Yeah.
I haven't had the opportunity to wander around New York. I've been to Niagara for a wedding, and that really is my whole experience with New York. But me and my wife live in an RV, and we travel from national park to national park. So I can't imagine that we won't be in.
So you're like you have that New York spirit.
Yeah.
If you're in an RV wandering around, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Kind of jealous, by the way.
I say this to everybody who says it. You can do it. Anybody can do it. It's with as much recording stuff as you have and things, you might have to have like a place that you can come back to record and stuff. But
right.
I mean, there's no reason you can't jump in a van and spend 6 months. I know that touring is probably similar, but not having to show up to certain dates and kind of just wandering but not lost.
Yeah, no, you can't. You don't have a lot of. Yeah, there's not a lot of time to kill on tour. You don't get a lot of that. But yeah, I'm jealous, man. Good on you.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
So are you currently working on any projects?
Well, aside from the re-record of album 1, which I'm kind of like 2/3 of the way through here. I have a side project with Josh Devine and Sandy Beals. We have like 3 or 4 songs that not Wheatus stuff, something different, something the 3 of us. Unfortunately, we don't get a chance to play together too much. I don't know if Josh Devine and Sandy Beals are in the One Direction band. They're friends of ours from the One Direction period where they covered the Teenage Dirtbag and we met and hung out. But
that's really cool.
Yeah, so cool. Great guys. Great musicians. Incredible musicians. So good. But yeah, there's always something going on. It kind of last month, Nate Webb, or 2 months ago, Nate Webb called me, and Spider Nate Webb, the wrestler, the independent wrestler, he called me up and he's like, he's been walking out to the ring to Teenage Dirtbag for 20 years, and he's like, I have this cooking show. We can't use Dirtbag. And I was like, well, let me cook you up something else then. And we came up with this little ditty called Spider Nate Webb is Cooking in the Kitchen. And that's a single that we have out there right now. So Wheatus featuring Nate Webb,
That's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. So just little stuff like that always coming along, we recently, MC Lars, their nerdcore rapper friend of ours, is working on a literature-inspired Teenage Dirtbag version.
Wow, that's really
things.
cool. I like
Yeah.
MC Lars. I heard I saw him at MC Chris and somebody else at like a tiny little place in like northern Cali. They just did this tiny show and it was really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. They're awesome. That whole nerdcore crew is really satisfying bunch of people. Mega Ran, and a guy named Tony, Fat Tony. Check out Fat Tony when you get a chance. He's almost like a psychedelic rapper, I would like to say, kind of like really, really smart, like really beautiful compositions and thoughtful narratives and like interesting little stories and stuff, like rabbit hole stuff. Fat Tony is a genius.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, there's like we could talk music all the live long, man.
It's easy to do, you know, talking about bands that you love and bands you've seen and stuff. But
yeah.
So what's on the horizon for Wheatus? I know you guys are re-recording.
So we're gonna finish this album up. We put album 7, the new album 7, on the back burner for the time. We're gonna finish this, re-record, put it out, get it released, and then move on to finishing album 7. And we're gonna hit the road again. We're currently scheduled to hit the road this summer, but it's got that asterisk on it, you know, whether or not people are all vaccinated yet is going to determine everything. So we hope it comes together. But in the immediate future, we're going to be doing our Patreon thing, patreon.com/Wheatus, and Twitter /Wheatus, and Facebook is Wheatus Official, and so is YouTube and Instagram. I do the Twitter myself because Twitter is kind of like the most political zone, you know, so I handle that one personally, but the others, we're accessible through the other channels as well. Patreon.com/Wheatus is kind of the place where that's where we meet with our friends. You know, that's the real sort of the hangout, you know. And that gets pretty special. We try really hard to make that like unique experience, you know. So that's got all kinds of, we could just have spent a whole episode on that world. But yeah, check it out.
Awesome. I will. And I hope everyone listening does as well. So I think that's pretty much all the questions I have for you. Is there anything you want to plug or talk about before we jump off?
No, I think I just got it all taken care of. Look out for our next pair of singles. Is going to be a song called Sunshine and a song that Joey Slater, our backing vocalist, wrote called Through. So that's album 1 song, Sunshine. Through is the Lost Songs song. So that pair is going to be coming out, hit Spotify pretty soon. And from now forward, we're going to have those pairs hitting the internet as they're finished. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear more of the stuff you guys are coming up with and album 7, and I'm stoked, and I hope everyone else is too. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks for reaching out. It was really nice talking to you this afternoon. I appreciate it.
It's been an honor. You know, I've been trying not to like fan out because Teenage Dirtbag was, I mean, on every mixtape I had from the time I was in 8th grade till my senior year in high school. So yeah, this has been a really amazing experience for me.
Thank you for keeping it alive and for looking for us in the afterlife.
Absolutely. All right, Brendan, thank you so much. And everybody, I'll leave it, all the links that Brendan's talked about here on the podcast in the description box below. You guys can check out all of his Patreon, Twitter, YouTube, all of it. So again, thank you so much, Brendan.
Thank you.
Yep. Goodbye.
Guys, I really can't say enough about Brendan. He was an absolutely fantastic guest, and I'm truly honored to be able to interview him. If you have any questions for me or Brendan, I will leave a link to both of our Twitters below. Also, if there is a celebrity you'd like to hear me interview, send a tweet to me and tag them in it. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did, and tune in next time when we interview the incredible Alex Chester. Stay gnarly, my friends.